Oh, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living with FASD, an educational and human interest show brought to you by someone with both professional and living experience with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. So I'm your host, Patty Casper, your FASD coach. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started with another Candid Conversation. This week, my special guest is Kenny LaJoy, and he is a young author, entrepreneur, pizza store manager. He lives with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and its challenges every day. His earliest years were spent in an orphanage in Kyrgyzstan, and it was there that he first began developing a relationship with God. A reliance on God. So at the age of 8, he was adopted and came home to the States. And he's been surrounded by just incredible parents. And your siblings, I think, also were adopted by the same family, which is awesome. You get the chance to have birth and adoptive siblings all together. And welcome, Kenny, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. I heard about your book from Natalie Vecchione from FASD.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's a good friend.
Yes, she is too. I think she's the world's book. I already call her the concierge because she seems to know everybody, right?
Right,
I
right,
think
yeah.
she's a good friend to all that she meets, and she's just such a blessing for so many people. But so I've had you on my radar for a while to have on Living with FASD, and I want to read just real quick the introduction that really talks about why did you write that book. So what drove me to take on the daunting task of writing a book, and having finishing up that process myself. Yes, it is definitely daunting. So you say affirmation. I needed to record for myself, possibly for others, the affirmation that it's okay to be disabled and that it's okay to be me. So why don't and then you start talking about self-doubt. Why don't you share with us a little bit about self-doubt and you're wrestling with that?
Yeah, I would say, in the FTX world, we talk about, and really in the disabilities world, we talk about primary conditions or
Mhm.
primary things that we can't control, and then the secondary. And one of the most powerful secondary byproducts of disability is doubt. Now, of
Mhm.
course, we all have it, but I feel like especially with neurodivergent individuals,
Yeah.
doubt is very strong. It limits us in many ways. Um, and so to me, I needed something that to say that was okay, that was the way that was, that like to kind of rebuff that doubtness.
Mhm.
That's not to say that I've conquered my doubts, but to say that I've made it easier to deal with
Yeah.
them. When not every time, there are some real limits in my life,
Mhm.
but there's also a lot of manufactured or artificial limits I put on myself because of those doubts.
Yeah.
And so if we can communicate that we can at least tackle those artificial doubts, it can really make our life quite a bit more free than we think it is.
Yeah. There is a saying for a reason, that I am my own worst enemy.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of times, yes.
I know it's true for me. So I jotted down some thoughts as I was going through your book, and I just figured we'd talk about them today. Um, you say pain happens in life and is completely out of your control. Suffering is in your control, and you dictate how long and how severe your suffering is. What wise words for a relatively young man. How did you come to be that wise and to take hold of that thought?
So I don't know if it's wisdom or if it's just simple copying.
Oh,
It's from Archduke. not Archduke, Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South
Mhm.
Africa. He was talking about that, and when I heard that, it really spoke to me about like, and I think also the Dalai Lama talked about it. But either
Yeah.
way, I read from their book, the Book of Joy, about how many ways, like you said, we are our own worst enemies. It's
Mhm.
that there are some things in life where, like, hey, if you get in a car crash, yeah, that's going to hurt a lot. That could be a lot of pain. But if it's like a year later and you're still like complaining about the car crash and you're okay, like whatnot,
Mhm.
then you're just kind of prolonging that suffering. You're
Yeah.
agonizing over something that's already done, over with. That's not to say that certain events don't make an impression on our life, because of course they do, but we don't need to let them define us. We don't need to let it dictate how we are in the
Right.
world. And many times we let our suffering embitter us, change our mood, and pain and suffering that isn't transformed is really transmitted. We
Mhm.
try to give that to other people instead of
Mm.
working on ourselves with it instead.
So
That's
lashing
not to
out
say
at
we need,
others.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's not to say we can do everything by ourselves, but if we reaching out to people that can help us and whatnot, and
Yeah.
moving forward and re-examining how that event affected our life instead of only looking at like, oh, this is just misery.
Yeah. So I did notice how diverse your reading list has been. Some of the people that you have quotes in the book are just phenomenal. Not many young people read that caliber of writings. So that impressed me. But as I was listening to you a minute ago, I'm thinking, how much of our society today plays the victim? It's like we are being encouraged to stay within that victim mentality. And that's a broader culture. That's not just those of us with invisible disabilities. What would you say to anyone who's maybe their family has been encouraging, oh, nothing is your fault, just be mad at the world, keep that chip on your shoulder? What would you say to them?
um, I think there's a middle ground in that sense of there are. I just came from church camp, and we were talking about chains. There are chains that pull us down, and then there are chains that bind us to something better, and
Mhm.
community and relationship, healthy relationship. So there's nothing wrong to and speaking honestly and authentically about the chains that bind us down, that drag
Mhm.
us down, or can feel like, and that can sometimes be either families, certain unhealthy relationships,
Mhm.
certain institutional and your cultural things that can feel like they're chains. The problem goes into where we let that be our excuse for everything. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. So yes,
Yeah.
you might suffer. Well, like I in the disability world, it's the idea of, like, just because you're disabled doesn't mean you have to be mean.
Mhm.
And I feel like there's sometimes that in the FAS world where where acceptance also means accepting of bad behavior as well, if that makes sense. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, we struggle, but being mean is not a disability. Being
Right.
cruel, or that's not to say we don't all say things sometimes that we really don't mean. That's, we
Right.
all have those moments. But to use that as a regular excuse, and I think
Right.
we're actually really hurting ourselves and either our children or those we care for by giving them those excuses
Yeah.
to never improve upon.
Yeah. Yeah. We can be
If that makes
impulsive
sense.
without being jerks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And and if we work on that, if that's something you've been raised in and whatnot, of like excuse making, it can take a while to get out of that mentality. And
Mhm.
I would encourage you to work on that and to find people who hold you accountable while not shaming you.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
difference between holding accountability and shaming someone for their behavior.
Absolutely.
I've always loved the idea of like between guilt and shame. Shame is something that you're attacking who they are as a person, and guilt is
Mhm.
more about the action they've taken. You know,
Right.
you can do bad
Right.
actions while not being a bad person.
Right.
And
Right.
so, but the idea of being a victim, and there are some real victims in life, and where when their pain is not acknowledged,
Mhm.
it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
There has to be an acknowledgement of real pain, not suffering, but of real pain,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Back to our earlier point.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally does. And I think I think what we're talking about though is that mentality of keeping victimhood as your identity,
Yeah, yeah, learn
right?
to define you.
Instead of just being a season of life that you pass through, right? A
True.
challenge that you didn't deserve, but you got stuck with it. You got to deal with it and find a way to let it strengthen you as opposed
And
to becoming an identity.
some things you're, and I can think of that this in like in my birth country. It's some things you're just a victim to daily too.
Mhm.
If you're in a country that where there's very little food and the ultra wealthy, whatever, then you're on a daily basis you're being victimized by the powers
Yeah.
that be on a daily basis. So the idea that that isn't happening too. So there's a middle ground. It's not
Mhm.
learning to, but even like I always go back to what's her name? Who wrote The Hiding Place? Something Brooke. She's talking about even in the concentration camp, she could still find um, a little bit of joy, a little bit of
Yeah.
gratitude.
Yeah.
So even if you're in the midst of that victimization, which should be recognized and stuff, it doesn't mean that should define who you are in the world.
Right. Right.
So it's not that like you have to be like, oh, once you're over that thing, then you need to stop complaining. No, it could be still happening while still not
Right.
learning to completely define who you are.
And in our FASD world, we do have it, but we are more than it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I write that very much so in my last chapter of It's
Yeah.
Okay to Be More.
Yeah. You also say the opposite of joy is self-centered sadness.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful turn of words that I had never come across before. Self-centered sadness. How did you learn that?
That was actually something I came across uh during my seminary work or studies, and it was when I saw that I really, really liked it.
Mhm.
It was really calling to the pettiness, having pity on oneself constantly. And
Mhm.
so it's once again, it's extending that suffering, that internal
Yeah.
suffering of, oh, I'm
Yeah.
the victim. Oh, the world's out to get me. Oh, I can't do
Yeah.
anything. And
Yeah.
so it's an interesting cocktail of doubt, fear, self-loathing, and
Mhm.
some attention too, in the sense that we want a little attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we can't get it from what we do, then we'll get it from what we lack.
Yeah.
We just call attention that way. So it's an
Yeah.
interesting cocktail of all these different feelings.
I really love the way you just
Yeah,
phrased that. It's a cocktail of and all these other elements. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I like that. We need to change the ingredients, right?
yeah. And some of those are much harder to tackle than others, but
Hmm.
one of them I've always found to be, at least for my life, the biggest cure for a lot of that. It's just gratitude. And that sounds really hokey, but it's even in the littlest of stuff, like, wow, I have a really comfortable bed to sleep in. That makes me feel pretty happy.
Yeah.
Oh, this was a good meal. Oh, whatever. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering
Yeah.
gratitude to be like,
Yeah.
wow, I got this brand new house. The little things is what keeps you content in life.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
having a broader picture of, yes, there are some struggles I have, but one, it could be worse, and two, like, what am I overlooking that is good in my
Mm,
life? And that can really start tackling a lot of that
yeah.
cocktail that leads to self-pity and self-centered sadness.
Yeah. You'll probably appreciate this, Kenny, as spiritual leader that I had for a season of life that was way too short.
Mm,
Used to say that, instead of pharmacology, right, like antidepressants, he would turn to gratitude and praise. And he had one of those, it looked like a beeper, but it was a timer. and he had it set to go off every 10 minutes. It would vibrate. And it didn't matter if he was doing a sermon, if he was teaching a class at the university, if he was driving down the road, if he was awake and it went off, he thanked God for something. And he said, this is what it means to be in prayer, in that unceasing prayer that you read about in scripture. This is how you fulfill that, by constantly throughout the day identifying something to be gratitude, gratitude. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to
Grateful
be as
for speaking that.
and it doesn't have to be quite as strict as that, but the idea of getting into regular habit of being grateful, it really does start to change your thinking, and for the better, at least in my opinion.
Apathy, on the other hand, you write a lot about apathy in your book, and say that it isn't a depressing acceptance of our situation, but it is actually an act of self-harm. That's really kicking it up quite a notch.
How
often do you see that play out, that it takes depression to that whole next level of actually being self-harm?
Well, there's the physical self-harm, but there's also the well-being of self-harm. When you're apathetic, you have, at least from when I was, you have completely separated from caring. And and when you stop caring for yourself and for others, which will lead to harm. Relational harm, physical harm, abusive harm. There's a lot of that. Apathy or not caring about what's going on around you and to you as well will lead you to make decisions that, even if you don't think in the moment, you're like, oh, I'll hang out with this person even if I know it's not good for me because I just don't care. And then that could lead you to situations that's very dangerous. Or I will keep being in relationship with someone who doesn't like, who's harmful because I don't care about what happens to me. Or simple like, I would damage stuff I owned because whatever. It's like, it's not like it was worth that much because of my stuff, and whatever I own can't be worth much. And so like, it would damage stuff I own that have monetary value, but like didn't have any emotional value or things, but then I'll destroy my own stuff, and then that would cost me too. So that's a different kind of harm. And two, so it's about there's a difference between pity, and pity's in there too, but it's about like you get to a point of where like you just are tired of feeling of wanting to engage in whatever, and that can be a very dangerous position, to where it can lead to being very apathetic to what happens to you, even to thoughts of suicide and whatnot. And so apathy is probably one of the most dangerous feelings and most that we can get into. And it's something that can start creeping in. It doesn't have to be full blown, but just slowly start creeping in.
It is insidious, isn't it?
Yeah. So,
and
I would say
as I
very
listen,
harmful.
as I listen to you, I'm thinking about how this kind of dovetails into how actively we pursue self-care. Right? Oh, I'll start my diet next week. Next month. Oh, next year's good enough, right? I have time. Is at least, the older we get, because I'm very postmenopausal, I can no longer get away with eating what I want.
No, I get that.
And that apathy just is very familiar. And that's a form of self-harm when we're not actively performing self-care. It is self-harm.
I would agree with that totally. I would say one thing I've noticed though is there's this very much trend of self-think. In that sense of, now self-care is very important, but we're also, and the opposite of self-care is that self-centered sadness. But there is a lot of the self, 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 self. And I don't feel like I hear a lot about, um, or it's assumed in culture now that's like, oh, we're always taking care of other people. No, we're not.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
If we were taking over other people, I think our world would be very different. And yeah, I feel like there's so many self-help books, there's so many self-pity books, there's so many generational trauma things, there's some, there's a
Mhm.
lot of victim things, and it's all about us. It's all about like, oh, what am I going through right now? What can I do to improve myself? And
Yeah.
yes, we need to think
Yeah.
about that too, because we
Yeah.
matter in the conversation. But I feel like I only hear that. And we've
Yeah.
kind of gotten away from the very simple things, at least for me. And I'm a Christian, I would say that of going very back to the basics of like, love your neighbor. Like what happened,
Mhm.
and ask yourself too. You matter within that conversation, but I feel like I only hear about that self-care,
Yeah.
that self-love, which is
Yeah.
important too. I understand that, but I don't know, it almost seems it's like I find that I feel better, that I do better in the world when I'm serving others, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
I feel like
It
that
it
does feed myself. That does then help improve my confidence. That does help
Yeah.
improve. So a lot of that self-help thing kind of fixes itself by serving others. And
Yeah.
also that gratitude also comes in because you're like, oh wow, I could be in that position. Wow,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
gratitude am I in?
Well, and I think there too, there's that middle ground that we were talking about
Yeah,
earlier,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So, because, having, my background in therapy and social work,
Hmm.
um, if you don't put we always use, when we talk about self-care, we always use the analogy of you're in a plane and you hit
Yeah, yeah.
turbulence and the oxygen drops down. Instinct is put it on your kid. But if you don't put it on yourself first, you won't be able to put it on your kid. Right.
Yeah.
So, and we can't pour from an empty cup. And, at this point, it sounds trite. But it really is true.
Oh, it's
Um,
very true.
yeah.
I'm just only worried that, and maybe it's just in the circles that I'm in, that it seems that that as we talk more about the self, we also hear more about like the self victim, the self,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I at least from what I'm realizing now, they might be tied together. The more that we think about the self, the more that we have very much of a That's not to say we shouldn't think of the self, because we went too far the other way too. Where like,
Yeah.
oh, as long
Yeah.
as you're just working and doing
The,
something, you're
the
good.
pendulum
Don't focus on
swings.
exactly. And I feel like maybe the
Yeah.
pendulum swinging a little too far the other way. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, the commandment's pretty simple, love
Yeah.
your God, love your neighbor as
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Like you got the triple thread there. And I
Yeah.
feel like it seems like we can't ever find a good balance. It seems like.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference too between self-care and self-spoiling.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah.
No. Okay. Um, Another thing that you talked about that I really loved your turn of phrase that I've never heard before, but I'm going to start using this phrase. I don't know if it's just something that your family says or if it's, from where you're living that is said a lot, but living into things. We hear a lot about leaning into adversity in order to learn from it and grow and stretch. But you said living into things, like living into possibilities, living into opportunities. And that is such a beautiful sentiment. Um, Tell me how, as you really embraced your full understanding of FASD, how did you live into that?
Yeah, I would say the living into it is really that's the contrast to of apathy.
Hmm.
When you're apathetic, you're trying to get by, and not just get by, but to just kind of float by, just to kind of just cruise, be
Yeah.
on autopilot, and living into something, fully investing yourself into it, into feeling all the emotions of what you're going through,
Hmm.
and to encouraging yourself, and to really being in present with what you're doing. And I think that's what it was referencing to, kind of as a contrast or
Yeah.
in opposition to that apathetic way of living. And
Yeah.
so it's something I don't know. It came from a more churchy, faithy kind of base of
Hmm.
we live into the kingdom, we live into the
Yeah.
gospels, we live into that, and so that's kind of where I kind of got that from.
Yeah. I've not in any of the faith circles that I've been in have we used that phrase, but I
Really?
really,
Okay.
really like it. Yeah. You know, it so much of our society now does want to be on autopilot, does want to, automate everything,
Yeah, yeah,
and
we
trying
pay
to
for
build
that
my business. We
convenience.
see advertisements all over the place to automate your business, automate this, that, and the other so that you can, you know, go skateboard or go do whatever while things take care of themselves. And it's like, I think I'd rather live into it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
And that's not
build
to say there
those.
aren't good tools that can help you live into it better.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want to be part of that. You don't want to just be, there's a difference between playing a video game a lot, like The
Hmm.
Sims, and then actually living a life, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
true, so.
Um, you say fear is an empty dream board. That's powerful. Where did you come up with that, right? Like the abandonment of dreams and um living only in the moment, kind of like what we were just talking about. But an empty dream board, a
Yeah,
lot of
I'm
people
not sure if
don't
that's,
that
yeah.
concept of a dream board or vision board, that's a new phrase for a lot of people. How would you explain that?
Yeah, it was something my mom talked about, where it's like, oh, if you want to envision your life and what you want to achieve, what you want to do, like make a board and just put things up there.
Mhm.
But there's another book I found great wisdom in, is from Eastern philosophy called the Tao Te Ching. And in verse 21, I believe, I might be wrong, it talks about how hope and fear are both hollow phantoms,
Mhm.
and how they both arise from thinking of the self. We fear for ourselves and we hope for ourselves. And
Mhm.
it's to me, I very much struggled with fear and with hope. And when I kind of abandoned or let them go, when I stop thinking about like what do I want out of life? What are my achievements? And more just say, no, God does provide. There is
Mhm.
plenty. And that's not to say it's a laziness of like, oh, just live up, move off, but it's more like just like let it come as it is. Work hard and like see what life takes you to, instead
Mhm.
of having high expectations of well, like, oh, by 21 I want to be doing this, by 25 I have to be doing it. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
then also too, there comes the fear of, oh my gosh, I'm at 21 and I'm not doing that. Oh my God, I'm
Mhm.
in fear. Oh man, I'm not achieving, I'm
Yeah.
not moving forward. So they're
Yeah.
both tied together, that dreaming and that fearing, and kind of letting that go. At least for me, and I'm not encouraging that, is has helped me a lot to live in the moment, to really take life as it is, and to
Yeah.
be grateful for what it is in the moment.
I remember all the stress of turning 25 and none of my goals had been met.
Yeah, and I would say for mine, I'm about to actually turn 25 in a couple of months, and I didn't have any goals. And yet, if you look on paper, and it's very hard, I'm not trying to brag, but it's like, oh, you wrote a book, you own a successful business, you have no debt, like like that, like on paper. Now I don't actually feel that way in the sense of like I've achieved anything, but on paper it can look like, wow, you've done a lot,
Hmm.
since you
Yeah.
become an adult and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's just from living a life of just kind of like just not of accept well of acceptance, but of like working hard and letting life take it where you get. It's not expecting or demanding something from life.
Hmm.
And also, too, when you're not demanding something from life, you also don't feel like a victim to it. You don't feel like, oh, I
That's
deserved that and
such
it didn't happen.
that is
It's like,
such a good
no,
point.
why? Yeah, why do you feel you were entitled to A, B, or C? It's
Hmm.
like, yeah.
Such good points. Okay. Um know your limits and hone your skills. Yeah. I have the sneaky suspicion that that came from your mom.
Yeah. Well, maybe not that exact phrasing, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
that philosophy. Yeah, very much so. Yes,
She seems like an amazing, incredible woman, and I know that
she is pretty incredible.
Natalie Vecchione certainly feels that way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say with that phrase, it's more about like know where the bumpers are, know how far
Mhm.
you can go. But
Yeah.
skills, by and large, is something you can always improve on, make a little sharper, a little better.
Yeah.
And the areas that you succeed at, and it helps make those limits while they're there easier to deal with, if that makes sense. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and I think part of it too is really understand, at least in terms of living with, whether it's FASD or some other neurobehavioral condition, really understanding what particular skills does my brain struggle to be able to do, right? Versus your brain versus Joe Schmo's brain. We which is why, the emphasis today on neurodiversity is so good, because we're all different. We're
Mhm.
all uniquely wired, with a particular set of challenges that no one else has, a particular set of strengths that nobody else has, and a particular preference for how we like to learn, right? That really sticks and takes hold better. And putting those three together, we are as unique as our fingerprint is.
Mhm.
Um, so I think taking hold of, what are those limits? What are those strengths? You asked in the book, does a river resent its banks?
Yeah.
Not at all, right? It
Mhm.
directs the flow. It direct, and it's so much easier. Like if you were to stand in a river, it's so much easier to go with the flow than fighting the current.
Oh yeah.
Right? But understanding our challenges is how we do that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
then too, the same point of putting expectations on that river. Oh, you will get me to this place by this time. It's like, no, the river will do what it wants, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So it's yeah.
I think things happen to us, not necessarily because we've caused them or because, we've been bad or whatever, but just because there's lessons that we need to learn. And, coming from a place of faith, I always figured a good working definition is knowing that at the end of the road, when I look back on life, I'll be glad of all the lessons I learned, even if some of them hurt,
Huh?
because they all took me to where I got to be. Right. And yeah,
Yeah, and I was
you have a lot of gems in your book, just some real gems.
thank you. Yeah, I would say too, something's happened, and it could be the same thing. You could be like, well, did I learn from the situation? Well, did you? And how are you going to handle it differently this time? It's like, man,
Mhm.
I just dealt with this issue. Well, you're going to deal with it again. And what did you learn from the last time that can help you this time? And where it's not this big chaos that's coming down, it's more like, oh, okay, I already got tools to handle situation A, B, and C.
Yeah. And it might be that that's just part of the accommodations that need to be set up, because some of us, the brain impact, right, or the damage done is that inability to learn from our mistakes.
True, but
And
then
so it's more
then
than
you,
one or two repetitions, right? It's
yeah,
we beat our head against the wall until somehow we finally figure out how we need to make note of it so
mhm.
that the lesson can be applied.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why I talk so much in my book about, because I feel like my book, away from affirmation, is also primarily about relationship, a
Mhm.
relationship with those who care for you and
Yeah.
leaning on them. Because
Yeah.
if you're not able to learn or get all of that from that situation, they can help learn, and then trusting them in those situations of like, oh, okay, last time we did this and it's gonna work out so well, so let's do this time, and trusting
Yeah.
them, saying, yeah, we'll try
Yeah.
to do this instead, which will be a lot easier.
Yeah.
for said situation.
And part of it for those who are watching or listening, part of your strategy in each chapter, you have questions. You have
Mhm.
questions for someone living with FASD, and you also have questions for parents, caregivers, spouses, right? Because a lot of your readers are going to be older and married, or may have had several failed relationships.
Mhm.
I mean, just because we we live with this for a very long time,
Yeah.
longer than 34 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Uh,
it is so important. The one question you asked is, who are the people in your life that you trust, that
mhm.
beyond a shadow of doubt their intentions are good and pure and just, and they've got your back.
Yeah, and even if
um
they fail, it wasn't out of spite or out of hurting you. It's because, we all
exactly.
fail.
Yeah, we do. Sometimes a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But but there's oftentimes, because we don't necessarily read those social cues well, that we can get mixed up with people who are very manipulative
Mhm.
and do not have our best interests at heart, right?
Yeah.
And which leads to misplaced trust.
Mhm.
So, yeah, good distinctions. And I like the companion question of that. Asking the parent or caregiver, what are you doing or saying to convey trustworthiness,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because that's important too. Oh, one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to shut my pump up from making noise. Oh,
Well, if it helps at all, I'm not hearing it. So
good. Because I just think, oh man, that's loud.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes we think certain things are louder than they actually are.
Right. Okay. Um, one other thing that I really, really appreciated is the emphasis on interdependence rather than independence, right? Our society, and pointing out the fact that while our society talks a good game
Yeah, yeah.
about the emphasis on independence and doing everything for ourselves and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, we would be nowhere if there was not an unspoken reliance on interdependence.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. We almost to a point of where we're harming our own selves and our own self-esteem. We're like, oh, you need to be all on your own, doing everything by yourself, and no one does it all by themselves. It's just
Yeah.
for the very beginning of human history, we've never been able to survive on our own, and
Yeah.
it's why we are so relational, and it's why we do feel bad when we are not included in stuff because we know that being excluded is risky. Being
Mm-hmm.
excluded is bad. It can be
Yeah.
very damaging.
Yeah.
And so we know that we need to stay close with other people in some way for our own survival. And
Mm-hmm.
yet now we act as if like, oh, like even with my own business, I put a lot of hard work into it, but to be able to say, oh, it was because of my hard work that it's doing it. Yeah, it's definitely my hard work, but it's also because I have really nice, the roads are paved well,
Mm-hmm.
I have customers who are able to easily get in and understand what's going on. I have, employees. I have my parents who help me out, I have
Mm-hmm.
other things. So, the idea of like
Yeah.
thinking you've made it all by yourself is just a ridiculous concept.
Yeah.
And it feeds into a false narrative and sets people up to
Yeah.
then when they fail, they feel like they've um
Like they're worthless.
yeah, that they're worthless.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, everyone else can do it. No, no one's been able to do it.
Yeah. I you
Find me one
used
person who's been able to do all by themselves,
yeah.
and succeed really well all by themselves. You really
In
can't.
in your book, you used the example of I didn't grow the wheat or thresh the wheat,
Yeah,
that ended up in my pizza dough,
yeah,
right? In my
yeah.
shop. And and I think, my mom, she has the most amazing green thumb. She's an award-winning, shade gardener.
Wow, that's
My thumb, on the other hand, is black.
cool.
I did not get that green gene. I can even kill spider plants and cacti. So that's saying something, because you got to work at that.
Right, right.
So if I had to live all on my own and eat only what I could plant and nurture and grow or kill, yeah, no, I'd be in a world of trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd be in a world of hurt. I wouldn't be here.
Yeah,
That's the
right. Yeah, same
reality.
here.
Yeah.
Same here.
Oh my goodness. So what you have some other real gems in there, right? That being wrong, it's not a moral issue. And that seems to be something else that a lot of people in our society get tripped up on. The need to be right, or that being wrong is failing.
Yeah,
It's not the same as, I think the words you used were dumb, bad, or incompetent, right? and
yeah.
and how are you able to help, whether it's the kids at your church camp that you're counseling, or your employees, how are you able to convey that message to folks?
I feel like it's an ego thing. We don't like being wrong because then it means that we weren't right, I guess. And that sounds opposite, but we like to be right for the sake of our egos a lot of the times. And
Because
when
it
it,
feels like
especially
praise.
right, right, yeah, and especially because with people with FASD, we have to have our relationship with being wrong has to be somewhat different from even a regular person. Because a lot of times we are going to be wrong.
Mhm.
It's a reality. We're going to mishear things. We're going to misinterpret things. Our brains do not understand reality, by and large, reality the same way that regular people do,
Okay.
or reality as it is. And so taking it away from the personal and taking it to just the brain. Oh, my brain misunderstood that. That can
Mhm.
save us that, I guess, our ego selves, or
Yeah.
or our fragile self. And then because
Yeah.
if we feel like we're constantly wrong, then we all constantly have that doubt. That builds that artificial barrier to like, well, I'm going to be wrong anyway, so I'm just not going to try.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm bad at it anyway, so why even bother?
Well,
And
we've
stuff like
come
that. And
full
then it
circle.
creates that apathy. Yeah, then it creates that apathy of like, well, I'm wrong, so who cares? I don't,
Yeah.
And so you have this full loop, and then it gets into depression and everything else, because you're in
Yeah.
this loop. So we have to have a very special relationship with knowing that we're wrong a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And then we're not wrong because we want to be wrong. When we think we're right, we really genuinely do think we're right. And it's where
Mhm.
that relationship comes in of like, I trust that person. If they're saying that, you can't really hear that, right? That I have that
Yeah.
ability to say, okay, even
Yeah.
if I think I'm still right, I am willing to trust them that I am
Yeah.
misunderstanding. That my brain, not I, but my brain is
Yeah.
misunderstanding what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think detaching almost your brain or your disability from the situation makes it a lot easier to say that we're wrong than just
Mhm.
that. Then,
Mhm.
and then two, the people who are around us, if they're not like, wow, you were wrong, if they're just like, oh, it looks like, like in a very soft way, a gentle way of like saying, oh, no, it looks like we had this going on instead.
Yeah.
And also using that same like, oh, I think your brain misunderstood, not you misunderstood, you got that wrong, but you're saying, oh, I think your brain misheard that, or
Yeah.
your ears weren't quite functioning,
Yeah.
quite the way that you thought they did,
Your
or
auditory
whatnot.
processing speed was a little delayed.
Yeah, yeah. And then two, like my mama always said, being very regular and very honest about when you were wrong. Like my mom said, if
Yeah.
she was wrong, she was very quick to say, "Oh no, you were right. I
Yeah.
misunderstood that."
Yeah.
That also
Yeah.
gives a world of affirmation of feeling, "Oh, I'm not always wrong.
Yeah.
My ideas are heard. And
Yeah.
even if I'm wrong 90% of the time, it's like 10% of the time, it's not going to be ignored,
Right. Because it
So,
is
yeah.
discouraging to always feel like
Mhm.
you can't do anything right, or you
Yeah.
can't. I mean, that's why we have secondary symptoms. right?
Mhm,
The
mhm.
anxiety, the depression, the anger, because it's just can be overwhelming,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly. And there's
Yeah.
a phrase I heard, and I can't remember from a little school book or whatever about FAS. I saw it online or something, but it was and, how we talk about disabilities are invisible, so we kind of suffer in silence, kind of. But it's like
Mm,
we're not invisible, but we're invincible. We're stronger because of this, being
mm,
able to live in a world where you're always wrong. Then when someone says that you're wrong, you're able to shake that off easier than,
yeah.
feeling that goes an attack on you.
Yeah.
And some ways makes you quite a bit stronger too in a world that is, and where other people's egos might be too big, ours are trimmed.
Right. Right. And I think too that that's just part of, having a disability in general. Because I learned that most powerfully first dealing with the diabetes,
Mhm.
being in communities where parents would, oh, I'm so sorry, so and so was diagnosed, oh, worst thing in the world. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't remember life without it. It's not the worst thing in the world.
Right,
Okay.
right,
It's
yeah.
given me strengths that I never, and character that I never would have had otherwise.
Mhm.
It's it's part of life. It's not
It
all of
is.
life, it's part of life. And this really is no different. Um, you know, you just have to learn to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and that's why I feel that the title of my book and stuff, it makes a lot of sense. It's not celebrating that like, wow, I am disabled. That's my identity. Now. No, but saying
Ooh.
that part of me is
Yeah.
okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to be that way,
Yeah.
but I'm also more than that too.
Yeah. Because it gives us, bad things happen to good people to give them what they need to reach out to others
Mhm.
in a way that those other people really need, right? It's kind of like the phrase being God with skin on, right? Sometimes our struggles really enable us to have a deep compassion
Oh yeah.
for others that that their next door neighbor or their best friend might not have. They just don't have the life experience to have that
Right, right.
compassion.
And I felt that my compassion very much derives from one, from my faith, but two, primarily, and maybe more so than my faith, is my disabilities.
Mhm.
Knowing that it's invisible, knowing that there's a struggle there that most people won't know about. And so when other people are struggling and whatnot, I'm not immediately jumping to, oh, they're lazy, oh, they're acting up, oh, they're doing,
Mhm.
no, it's like, oh, and that's not to say everyone is got disabilities. Some people are just really mean, just no matter what, but going to that compassion area first will always benefit you more and more often and longer term than being pessimistic or
Yeah.
judging people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, I just I'm scanning my notes to see if there were any other gems that I don't want to end our conversation if we don't talk about them. Um, Here's one of the questions from your book that I would challenge our listeners or viewers to consider. Are there people in your life who refuse to understand, and have you made peace with them? But that's huge, isn't it? Yeah, because
Yeah, it's learning to
when I
sometimes
was,
those are the people that chain us down that we were talking about earlier about.
mhm,
Those are and to being that's not just saying that you're like, oh, I hate that person. No, but being willing to say, all right, being in a relationship with that person is more damage than
yeah,
maybe having a peaceful party is better.
I think too. I mean, usually, when I read that, I'm thinking, okay, we're talking about neurotypicals who
Hmm.
don't want to understand brain-based differences, right? Or being
Hmm.
neurodiverse or divergent. Um, but I think even when we look at people with brain-based differences, we emphasize it's not won't, it's can't. We
Hmm.
cannot do things the way as it's expected for
Hmm.
the average person. But I think that applies on the flip side as well.
Yeah.
For someone, because when I was studying at Facets to become a certified facilitator of the neurobehavioral model, they said not everyone is going to make this paradigm shift to view behavior as a function of brain as opposed to choice. And
Hmm.
they said not everyone's going to be able to make that switch. So here's where I would say the same thing comes into it's can't, not won't. Something is causing a block
Hmm. Yeah, very
for
much
them to
so.
make
Yeah.
that switch. And that
Yeah.
way we can give them compassion, even as their refusal to give us grace causes us pain.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it. I love that. Yeah. But that still doesn't mean we have to subject ourselves to being in regular. It's like knowing that, like, oh, if I drink salt water, that's not healthy for me. Yes, it's
Mhm.
going to be salt water no matter what. At least this from this bottle, but I don't have to regularly drink from it.
Right.
And there are some people who we do have to have some regular contact with who don't understand, and that's
Mhm.
okay. That's okay as well.
Yeah. As long as there are people in life that
Mhm.
do have your back and can give you
Yes.
that
Yeah.
validation. Yeah. Yeah. Kenny, I'm so glad you came on the show. Are there any last thoughts that you might want to share? Is there any? Are you writing a sequel yet? Are there any projects you're working on that we can give a shout out to and draw some attention and publicity for?
Yeah, no, there's not really like I'm doing a local project in my community right now, but that's fairly local to where it wouldn't make real sense. It's called the not invincible but invincible project where we're gonna be setting up playground equipment that is
Mhm.
more accessible for anyone
Oh, very
go
nice.
around our town. So that could be really cool. But that's a very local thing.
Okay. But
But
that's
still,
somebody that maybe someone, if they were interested in supporting that, could donate toward, right?
yeah, yeah, you could, or at least reach out. Yeah, and you could just reach out via my my either me on Facebook or the websites I've given via the book and stuff. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we can highlight that in the show notes. Are you doing a 5K as part of Run Fast this year?
No,
No?
no. I really like what's her name who runs it? For some reason I'm
Rebecca?
blanking. Rebecca, yes, I very much like Rebecca, but
Yeah.
it's more of a time issue right now. But I really have looked into it, and I definitely want to donate to it and everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I'm that kind of, and also too, I'm not terribly athletic, so
Well,
that's not one
I'm
area
not
that.
either, and personally I'm going to be sitting under a thing with a case full of books hoping to sell them.
There you go. There we go.
I'm very sedentary. And I
But
shouldn't
no,
be,
I
but I'm so
yeah.
chock full of arthritis. It's okay. Other people can do the
Yeah,
5K.
I don't. You see, I don't have any excuse. I'm just lazy.
But it's okay to be you.
You're right, right. There you go. Uh,
Oh my
yep, yep.
goodness. Well,
Well,
it
thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been very lovely to meet you and talk with you.
it has been my pleasure, Kenny. Well, everyone, it's hard to believe that another episode has come and gone and wrapped up already. So, if you have an FASD related topic that you would like me to cover on a future episode, or want to learn more about, or have questions you would like an answer to, or maybe just want to reach out and say hello, then please email me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can join the Facebook community called Living with FASD Podcast and join the community. And there you can interact with other listeners if you guys want to, if people there want to talk about a particular episode, whatnot. And it has been an honor and a pleasure to bring this candid conversation to you this week. Also, I am a certified, as I mentioned earlier, a certified facilitator of Facets neurobehavioral models. So if you are interested in having me do a staff development training or a community agency training on the neurobehavioral model, then you go to the show notes and there will be a link for my Calendly, my e-scheduler. So book a free consultation and we'll see what we can get set up for you. All right, everyone, come back next week for another Candid Conversation. And yeah, I'm your host, Patty Casper, your FASD coach. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.